UCF has finally completed their coaching staff, but how well did they do?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For the first word on this show, from the last word on sports, is my good friend, Andrew Gluco, a.k.a. Stat Boy Drew. UCF basketball bounced back after a humiliating loss. They dealt out a humiliating loss to TCU. This is the one that we said they had to have. You couldn't afford to lose this game. Look, Keyshawn Hall bounced back in this one. It was a great night for him. 26 points, 11 of 13 from the free throw line. We talked about how missed free throws, Andrew, cost them the game. They didn't miss a bunch in this one.
No, in fact, they stormed out to an early lead.
They did. This is where you had to be if you're UCF, dominating this opponent. They did that. Look, I think this puts UCF kind of right off that bubble conversation. Maybe. How do we feel about this win by UCF versus TCU?
Well, I mean, this was needed. They needed this for a number of reasons. One, it was hit the reset button on a number of players that had up and down game. Keyshawn Hall still kicking himself for the dud he had against Houston. If he played, even close to his average, UCF wins that game. That's the one that got away. But this is the start of a really interesting stretch for the Knights. Obviously, coming up on the 28th is the away game at Kansas. I'm not really expecting much there. Just play hard. Don't get hurt. Play hard. Try to keep your head, in a good spot. It's the following three games after that: home against BYU, home against Cincinnati, on the road Baylor. These are all games that are really important for UCF. All three have net rankings above UCF. BYU in the top 40 at 38. Cincinnati at the top 50. I believe they're at 48. And then Baylor, the top 30 at 28. So these are all valuable games. If you look at bracketology right now, and some of them are a little more updated than others, UCF is either in the tournament, right on that bubble, or just south of it, depending on where you're going. You have a couple of them, such as I believe it was, team rankings and Fox Sports that have UCF in the playing game. ESPN has them in the playing game. Team rankings has them just outside, a little bit. And then as one of the next four outs, D ratings. So, I mean, you've got five, brackets that have their own bracketology. Three of them have UCF in the tournament as of right now. They have a ways to go. They have to push things. They have to win a couple of these important games. They're 3-5 in quad one. They're 65 in the net. What really helps them is their strength of schedule. They have the 14th ranked strength of schedule, according to Warren Nolan. And that's what's really propelling them here. Because they had the win against Texas A&M to open the season. They're 12th in the net. That Texas Tech win to open conference play has looked better and better. It's on the road, and Tech's 11th in the net. So it just makes UCF's win that much more impressive and a more important as a marquee win for the selection committee. Because the net's important, but those marquee wins are as, if not more important than just the net ranking.
Agreed. Look, you mentioned the Walter Nolan rankings. These are cool. And if you haven't gone to walternolan.com, I highly recommend going there. They've got a schedule rank, a current strength of schedule rank, mind you, of 14th in the country. We talked about the Big 12 gauntlet and how if UCF is going to navigate it, they're going to have to pull some upsets here to make the tournament. So Walter Nolan says this is the 14th hardest schedule in the country, and I want to talk about the teams ranked ahead of them right now. Currently, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Arizona State, Louisville, Kentucky, Texas A&M, North Carolina, Kansas, Purdue, Memphis, and rounding out the top two, Auburn and then Alabama, as the hardest strength of schedules in the country. Look, this is no small task for UCF if you're trying to get to the tournament, to find wins on a schedule that is going to be increasingly difficult to navigate as you go through the end of the season. So give me an upset here on the schedule. Looking at the schedule right now, I'll give you time to pull it back up if you don't have it up. But who's your most likely upset, Andrew, when you're looking at this UCF schedule?
Well, I think the best chance they have to win, I guess you call it an upset, would be Baylor. Baylor 28th in the net, so that they've got a really strong rating. They're 12-6. They've got the 35th strength of schedule. They have some good wins. They're 2-5 in quad one wins. So it's not like BYU that's kind of a fraudulent team. This is a team that actually has won a game that matters. They took UConn to the wire, fell short. They've got a couple hard games coming up with Kansas and Texas Tech and Houston over the next week and change. So, I mean, they've got a chance to really make or break herself, as well. I just want to point out, how UCF and Baylor play on February 8th. That's a Saturday. The two games before that is home versus Kansas and away at Texas Tech. So I mean, there's a possibility Baylor can get a little dinged up with some hard games coming and then hosting UCF. And who's the game after UCF? At Houston.
Right.
So UCF is a trap game.
Yeah, look, I'm looking at this schedule and I'm just thinking, goodness gracious, you definitely have an opportunity to rack up some wins here, but I think you need one more signature win on this schedule, Andrew, if you're going to solidify, like when they start stacking resumes on Selection Sunday and they look at UCF's schedule. We talked about that Texas Tech win and how that is looking better and better as the season goes on. You opened up your season beating Texas A&M, so that win looks really good as well right now, continues to look good. And then as they move through it, I think one more, if you don't, this is barring them going on some crazy losing streak down the stretch, because the signature win kind of loses its air if you lose games you're not supposed to lose. But I think that just one more good win on this schedule will get them firmly off the bubble and into that tournament conversation. But hey, look, it's going to be a long season from now until March here. So we got lots of basketball to play. But we're going to pivot to football after this. It's portal season, and we want to talk about what's left in the portal right after a word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Intuit TurboTax. Andrew, do you use TurboTax?
Sure have, and I've been using it for years.
Look, taxes was waiting and wondering if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their individual attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All you can do is get money back, and that's great. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. This is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com. The portal giveth and the portal taketh away. The portal giveth a lot to UCF. As a matter of fact, there are only two teams, Andrew, in the entire country who brought in more in the portal than UCF did this offseason. We knew that Scott Frost had to remake this roster. That was not a secret. So he had work to do there. And boy, did he get to work in the portal. Pulling it back up here, UCF had 26 additions from the portal. 26 additions. That's actually crazy. What do you think
that's new coach syndrome right there.
It is.
Leave, and so you're going to have to retool. You saw it when West Virginia is one of those teams. I believe Purdue is one of those teams. We've seen Texas State when they had a head coaching change. Look at what Colorado did first year with Deion Sanders, just a complete overhaul of that roster. This is a new coach thing. It's going to become more and more common, but and that's why when you look at rankings, you got to take one with a little bit of a grain of salt, because you got to mix the two. You got to mix the high school, you got to mix the transfer portal, and get kind of an overall composite. As you know, the transfer portal is all about, plugging holes, filling your roster. You had a lot of turnover when you have a coaching change. UCF was no stranger to that, over 20 transfers out. You miss, the new coaching staff misses the December window for freshmen. And as a result, they're going to have to hit that portal even harder to get guys in. But the key is you got to make those guys count. You can't just bring in a warm body. They got to be someone that serves a purpose. And I think UCF's done a pretty good job. They went after guys that want to be here or want to be, coming back home. They're from the Central Florida area or nearby counties, maybe like, up in Brevard or Volusia. There's just areas that are part of the Central Florida region. They want to come back home. Maybe players like Sincere Edwards, who was a player that was hotly recruited by UCF under the Malzahn era, losing out the last moment when he signed with Pitt. Circumstances change. Now he's coming back home to UCF. So, there's players like that, they saw what RJ Harvey became as a hometown hero. And there's players that are interested in being the next hometown hero. As we know, the Central Florida area is a hotbed for talent. And a lot of guys, when they're in high school, they're like, oh, I want to get away from home. They go away and they realize, you know what? Home's nice. My parents can come watch me play and everything. UCF's now become a much more attractive place to come back to as part of the Big 12 and with a different coaching staff in place. And so they're coming back. And I think this is going to, continue on as UCF tries to build a new reputation as a place to come and win. You're going to see players who wanted to have a little bit of wanderlust and get away from mom and dad, now want to come back so that they can watch them play in person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this transfer portal class, and before we started recording, we talked about it. There are only two schools in the Big 12 ranked ahead of UCF. In this regard, Colorado and I believe it's Texas Tech, who brought in a ton of kids through the portal. So look, man, it's when you're looking at how he had to rebuild this roster, to me, this screams rebuild. This is truly a rebuild if you're Scott Frost. And that word gets thrown around a lot. Like people say, oh, it's a rebuild because you had one bad season. But I think that there is definitely a talent gap that has to be filled here. On this roster, if you're Scott Frost, you're trying to bring the talent up to your peers. And that's, to me, what marks a rebuild. I see this as a 100% rebuild in my mind. You got to find a quarterback. You've got to change a culture. This is a rebuild.
Well, I think rebuild has a connotation that comes from the pro level. When you hear rebuilding, it's a tear down. It's basically a throwaway season. I don't think college is a throwaway season because you can build a roster, a competitive one, relatively quickly. It's not like the pros where you're limited in the maneuverability on contracts of players and drafts and all this other stuff. You can overhaul a roster pretty quick. And UCF's brought over 25 guys in just through the portal. That's not even counting the new freshmen that come in, and they lost over 20 through the portal the other way. So you already had a major overhaul in your roster. So I think there's a negative connotation in the term rebuilding, but it still is. From letter of the law, it's a rebuild. Your program was torn down and you're putting it back together. Albeit differently. So I guess that comes back to perception versus reality. Perception is rebuild is a dirty term, but the reality is, it's a rebuild.
Yeah, it 100% is a rebuild. But you said something that's important there that I want to make sure we highlight for our listeners. In today's college football, you can do that a lot faster than you could in the past. And that's why the portal is so important, and why Scott Frost hitting the portal as hard as he did, I think, signifies to UCF fans, look, man, we're going to put the work in, because we don't want you to wait 5-6 years to have a winning program. We want you to have a winning program as soon as is reasonably possible, and we're going to do that through a mix of strong high school recruiting and getting talent to fill gaps now from the portal. And I think that's what they've shown here. Before we move on, how would you rate this portal class in your mind? Do you think that they filled the gaps that they needed here with the portal?
I mean, in some ways, I think it's a little bit of a scrap job. You look at some of the guys that come on. Taven Jackson as your quarterback. Yeah, I mean, is he bad? No. Is he going to set the world on fire? I don't think so. He kind of fits a need. It's what you have to work with. This buys time for development and competition. Obviously Dylan Risk still is going to be very much in the hunt. He's going to have a chance, but I think, you need competition. That's what breeds success. Make iron shapes iron. You need players that can compete for the job to help the others rise up to the occasion. But you have players like I mentioned, Sincere Edwards, who was a talented player, played for Pitt, not a bad pickup at all. But I mean, UCF's not really in the run for any 5-star guys. They don't have that kind of cash with them. So you could still build a good roster with 3-star players, or maybe some 4 stars, or some under the radar guys like Corey Kozlowski that we've talked about. He's definitely a below the radar guy coming from the FCS levels at Colgate.
Yeah,
you can still build a good squad with those kind of players. You got to find the right guys to help build that culture that you're talking about. As part of the rebuild is also build a new culture, and you need, even guys who are there for just 1 year, they matter. They're going to help pitch in and build that, because if they can build a good culture, the guys who are staying there will help perpetuate it and make new players want to be there. So you got to create that snowball effect.
Well, you can't create a good culture without a good coaching staff, which they have finally finished. We're going to talk about that crown jewel at the end of the coaching staff hire right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Andrew, it has been an exciting college basketball season. I got my girlfriend and my sister tickets to Auburn versus Tennessee. That game did not disappoint. But what did not disappoint me was betting Auburn to win it, which they did. And that makes me so happy. I also bet TCU big to cover. And boy, did they deliver as well, too. I'm sorry. I bet UCF to cover versus TCU. Sorry, guys.
Beg for forgiveness.
I did not bet on TCU. But look, both the bets paid out, and I did it with our friends at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sports book. Look, go to FanDuel.com, register for an account, and get betting today. You're guaranteed $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Mark D'Onofrio. Did I say that right? Yes, he is been hired as linebackers coach to finish out Scott Frost's staff. UCF hiring Mark D'Onofrio as linebackers coach. D'Onofrio said, "I'm thrilled to join Scott Frost's staff at UCF. It's an incredible opportunity to be part of a program with a strong vision and commitment to excellence. I'm deeply grateful to Coach Scott Frost and Alex Grinch for trusting me with this responsibility, and I cannot wait to get to work." Mark D'Onofrio. Look, there's nothing I love more than the rallying cry, "Let's work." This man is ready to get to work, and he's ready to do that on a defense that had some high points last year. They did some good things on defense last year, but certainly there's room for improvement. How do you feel about this hire, Mark D'Onofrio? He comes to UCF from Stanford.
I think you get a little bit of benefit in the fact that he coached at Miami, so he at least knows the state.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not my favorite assistant coach hire.
Okay.
I raved about the majority of the position coach hires. I thought this one was a little bit of a weaker hire. D'Onofrio is definitely a mixed bag when it comes to the results that he had. That time at Miami died with a dud. Al Golden gets fired after a 58-0 loss to Clemson, and while he stayed on the rest of the year, I mean, you're a lame duck at that point. A couple seasons at Houston, a year at Wisconsin, and then a couple more at Stanford. With what we've seen in those schools the past handful of years, I wasn't impressed.
Okay.
So maybe it was the players in this case, just wasn't the right talent. But I've kind of given a little bit of a side eye in this hire. Now, we heard about the rumblings of this of D'Onofrio being hired a while ago. It took forever to UCF to finalize it, and I'm very curious as to why it was rumbled about weeks ago, and it took until just the other day to finally finalize and announce the hire. I'm curious about that, but I don't know, man. I'm just not sold on this one. I think it's his weakest position hire yet. I've given a lot of solid A's, A minuses, B pluses to the position because I give this one a B minus. The track record just really does not sing to me.
Yeah, D'Onofrio is a guy who, he played his college ball at Penn State. He played in the NFL for the Green Bay Packers, albeit a while ago, so a little disconnected from this generation of pro football. But if you're Scott Frost, you had to get this staff rounded out, and that's what they did with this D'Onofrio hire. And you've got to start moving forward. So, maybe this is a situation where there's some professional development on the job for D'Onofrio under Scott Frost and Alex Grinch. As he mentioned, he's excited to be on the staff. And I think if you're Scott Frost, it's really important to have guys who want to be here. Right. And, to the extent that he's been somewhat of a journeyman, in terms of coaching, maybe this is an opportunity to get a guy in who will do a serviceable job, Andrew, but you have a chance to keep around and have stability on your coaching staff for the next, 3 to 4 years as you try to build a roster and recruit at a high level. Do you think, I think you can keep D'Onofrio around, and particularly if he's not the all-star hire that you say that he may not be, then he should stick around for a while. No?
Well, he was loyal to Al Golden. He coached with him for multiple years at Temple, and then moved with him to Miami. So he stuck with Al Golden for a number of seasons. So I can see him sticking around with Scott Frost if he delivers enough of a good product and show that loyalty. He just has to overcome his reputation as far as the product he's put out there, and have this linebacking core, which has had a major overhaul, step up.
Yeah. Look, continuity of staff is just such an underrated part of college ball, and being able to keep the same coaches year in and year out, especially when you're having success, is look, if Scott Frost is going to be successful, he's going to have turnover on his coaching staff. But in these first
nature of the beast.
Yeah, I think holding on to guys, for 2-3 years is definitely a win for any coach, and hopefully D'Onofrio fits that mold to help UCF fans get back to that place and that feeling that they had in 2017 about the trajectory of the program. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me today, man, to talk a little UCF football and basketball. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew. And while the offseason is starting, things are still going to still be moving around, you can catch my work on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
Guys, thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Told leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us tomorrow here on Locked On UCF.